Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Tara Raghuveer, director of the Tenant Union Federation. Tara, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much, Brittany.
You came on last year a couple of times. We were talking about the rental crisis in this country. Each time you said the rent is too damn high. So to start off the conversation, do you still feel that way?
The rent is too damn high. It's been that way for a long time. And unfortunately, there's no sign of slowdown. Rents are higher now than they've ever been, and tenants are in more pain in more parts of this country than ever before.
So what do you think the solution is? Because back in July, the Biden administration unveiled or called on Congress, rather, to pass legislation on rent caps. Do you think that went far enough?
The specific proposal, no, but I think it's important before we get to solutions to really understand the problem. The problem is the market. The market is a catastrophe. And the market is a catastrophe because the architects of the market, the people that set the terms of the market, are the profiteers. So the people who make money off of the places that we need to live. So the market is a catastrophe. It's a total failure, but it's a failure that serves the people who make that money. So in order to solve for that market, the first and maybe most important thing is to introduce a real regulatory agenda. The government is in bed with our landlords. That gives them some leverage. So the government actually needs to start using that leverage, regulating the landlords by any means necessary, including but not limited to congressional action to cap rents. Now, the specific proposal that Biden spoke to and now Vice President Harris has repeated on the campaign trail is about a 5% rent cap. 5% is good. It's probably not good enough. We need rent caps at about 2 or 3%. And we also need the executive branch to take seriously the power that it has to take that kind of action without congressional approval.
As we know, Vice President Kamala Harris is now at the top of the ticket. And last week, she unveiled part of her economic agenda. I want to read parts of it that pertain to housing and get your thoughts. She wants to provide a $25,000 aid for a down payment of first-time homebuyers. She called for 3 million housing units to either rent or buy be constructed over the span of 4 years, give a tax break for builders making starter homes for first-time homebuyers, and proposed a $40 billion innovation fund with the purpose of finding rental and housing solutions. Also on the campaign trail, she did say she was supportive of rental caps. What do you make of this housing proposal?
So I think the most important thing to note is that housing is at the core of Vice President Harris's economic agenda. And this is actually not something to rush past because this is new. In modern American politics, housing has been written off as a third rail political issue. It's been relegated to state and local governments. Everyone's pointing at one another and saying, this is your problem. This is your problem. It's not my problem. So the fact that housing is so center stage in national politics and to Vice President Harris's economic agenda is a huge deal. I think the best parts of the plan that she's spoken to so far are the ones that take seriously the need to protect tenants. The power dynamic is one that needs some massive intervention. And I think the proposals that Vice President Harris is talking about that have to do with the power dynamic between landlords, increasingly big corporate landlords, and their tenants are the best parts of this plan. And also that's the part that she needs to move most urgently on should she be elected come November. Her first steps need to be steps that bring material relief to the millions of tenants in this country who are paying way more than they can afford for housing that's way below the standards that they deserve.
Home ownership really has always been a core tenet of the American dream. For millennials and Gen Z especially, it feels like that dream is out of reach. There are a lot of renters. So do you think that this proposal goes far enough for renters?
I think there's room to go further. I really think that centering tenants in a housing agenda within an economic agenda for this country is critical, right? Rent is the core economic issue of our times. The most enduring and the largest contributor to overall inflation is the rent. It's shelter costs, right? And to your point, Brittany, for so many people, home ownership is out of reach. It's not even a question, right? Interest rates are what they are. The housing stock is what it is. There are so many people of the younger generations in particular who are simply not making enough money and they have no prospects to, so they're not on a path to homeownership. And I think it is wise for the candidates of any party to embrace an agenda that takes that seriously and starts to think about how to protect, and not just protect tenants, but actually ensure that tenants can thrive in the conditions that they are currently facing.
Harris has faced criticism for this proposal, mainly at that $40 billion innovation fund. People are concerned, where is the oversight there? Where is that money going? Where is it coming from? Lonnie Chen, a fellow at the Hoover Institution, told CNN that the rent caps particularly are the ugly part of this proposal. What do you make of those criticisms?
Economists for years have been bought by the industry lobbyists who have been concerted in their efforts to campaign against rent regulations. Just this morning, I was in a back and forth on Twitter with someone who was quoting the Cato Institute talking about how all economists hate rent control, et cetera. And one of the data points they were citing, they were like, listen, rent control is not popular. It's failed multiple times in California when it's been on the ballot. Here's the thing. Rent control is wildly popular. 73% of voters want to see rents controlled. They know the rent is too damn high, and the answer to rent gouging is rent caps. Most normal people you talk to are in agreement on that point. The thing that we're ignoring when we listen to just the economists who have been paid and the industry sycophants who are out there doing the campaigning for the real estate lobby, the thing that we're ignoring is that this is one of the biggest, most powerful lobbies in this country. This is an $80 billion lobby. This is up there with the NRA in terms of spending, right? So we actually cannot measure the popularity and the soundness of these types of policies if we just look to what's happened with XYZ ballot measures. Because the truth of those California instances is that the industry put $150 million into sinking the proposals in 2018 and 2020. That's not a reflection of whether or not those policies are sound or popular. It's a reflection of what the industry could buy, and they buy the outcomes they want.
I live in New York now for years. Before that, I lived in Philadelphia. Almost everyone that I know in both cities that live there are renters. And every person you would talk to would say the rent is too high. I wish there was more month between my paycheck and when the rent is due at the first of the month. No one's saying, you know what, I think my rent is very fair. So what do you think is missing from this national conversation then?
The national conversation for too long has been dominated by people who do not rent their homes and people who are paid to look at charts. And both of those groups of people, and sometimes they're the same people, are not engaging with everyday people of every walk of life who are facing what you're talking about, which is an impossible set of choices that they have to make every month, right? The rent is not only too damn high, it's also the biggest bill that most of us pay, meaning that in order to get the rent paid, in order to keep a roof over our head, everyday people are constantly forced into choices between whether they pay the rent or buy food, whether they fill their prescriptions or keep a roof over their head. And as we like to say, the rent eats first, right? You need a roof over your head pretty much before every other need of yours can get addressed. So too many people are forced into these choices, and the politicos for too long have been busy listening to consultants and people who call themselves economists who are not representative of everyday people. They don't feel the pain that is so resonant throughout the country. And I'm happy to say that the politics on this issue are shifting, in part because of our organizing and in part because the scale and breadth of the crisis is so severe that I think finally people are realizing you don't have an economic policy until you have a plan on the rent.
There was this father on Fox News. He had an interesting exchange with Donald Trump. He was saying that he has children and stepchildren, and the majority of those kids that he has are struggling with their rent, and he actually helps them every month, is what he was saying. He asked Donald Trump, if you're president, what are you going to do to address these housing costs? And I want to read you what Donald Trump said and get your response. He said this: we are going to drill, baby, drill. And he also said he's going to bring down the cost of energy. What do you make of his proposed solution there?
His response to that father was incoherent at best. I mean, he said, drill, baby, drill. He talked about China. He talked about all sorts of things. What he didn't talk about is a plan to bring down the cost of rent, right? And I think that question from that father is so relevant to today's political discourse. This is not an issue that is only resonant with the Democratic Party. It's not an issue that's only resonant with Republicans. This is an issue that impacts people of all walks of life, all over the country. There's no county in this country, Brittany, where a minimum wage worker can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And there are so many parents who are in the position that that father is in, where they're facing economic stress, maybe for the first time in recent years, because their kids can't afford to survive on their own. So people like that father, and like so many parents and individuals across the country, they deserve real answers. They deserve a coherent plan. They deserve a fighter. Regardless of political party, they deserve someone who's fighting for the people, fighting against the corporations that make profits off of our lives. And they deserve a real plan to readjust that power dynamic in a way that benefits tenants and checks our landlords who are so greedy and have made so much money off of our pain.
During President Biden's speech at the DNC Monday, he passed the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris, and he essentially said, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz will essentially continue my presidency. Hearing that from a perspective on housing, A, how do you think the Biden administration did when it comes to housing, when it comes to helping renters? And B, when you hear that, does that bring you hope, optimism, pessimism? What do you feel?
The biggest sea change that we've seen in the last 4 years is that housing is now a key economic policy issue. And for everyday people, it has been for a long time, right? This is the biggest bill that we pay every month. It just hadn't risen to the level of national politics and the focus that it deserved from our federal government until recently. So I'm happy to say that in the last couple of years, that started to change. And the rent is the center of a conversation about the economy, and we're talking about housing solutions. Now, we need to move beyond messaging and towards material change, right? People need to feel that change on the first of every month when they pay their rent. And that means that we need urgent solutions as well as the long-term solutions, right? Vice President Harris has been talking a lot about housing supply in recent weeks, and President Biden certainly was as well. Here's a couple issues with that, Brittany. First of all, they're talking about supply generally. They're not talking about affordable housing supply, and that's really where the need is. When we talk about supply generally, usually what we're doing is spouting industry talking points. They say this is all a problem of underproduction. If we could just build more, we would solve all our problems. That's wrong, and it's wrong, and it serves their interests, right? They want more money to build, but we cannot trust the perpetrators of the problem that we endure today to come up with the solutions, especially when the problem actually makes them money. So that's one issue with the supply discourse that we're seeing. The other issue is that building new supply takes time, and people are in pain right now. So that's what I mean when I say we need some urgent material change. And the way that that will actually come to the American people is through rent caps and other types of tenant protections that regulate the market as it exists today while we build alternatives to this market, because that's actually the long-term play.
To your point, we do need urgent solutions here because housing is not a political issue. Republicans, Democrats, independents, everyone in this country needs housing. So as we know, in the frame of an election year, it's either going to be Vice President Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. On the first day of their presidency, whoever wins, let's say that you had the opportunity to meet with them to talk about housing. What specifically would you say to Donald Trump, and what specifically would you say to Kamala Harris?
Well, first and more importantly, speaking of a meeting, anyone who's elected president needs to sit down with tenants, and not just any tenants, but tenants who are organizing as part of tenant unions. The industry has a chokehold on our political imagination. And that will not change until tenants have a rightful place at the table to make decisions that impact their own lives. So on the campaign trail and once elected, any candidate who's serious about moving on this issue needs to be meeting with tenants. And tenants organized through the Tenant Union Federation are more than happy to have those types of engagements now so that the candidates and then future electeds can deeply understand what they're going through. And then on day one, I mean, listen, Brittany, we've got an executive order drafted, right? There's a lot of action that the federal government can take, and specifically the executive branch can take within their regulatory authority and otherwise to bring down the cost of rent on day one and within the first 100 days. Then, of course, there are other proposals that need to go through Congress. The more universal proposals around rent caps, et cetera, probably do need to go through Congress. But on day one, anyone who's elected president could do something like regulate the $150 billion of lending that the federal government does with our landlords and say every dollar of federal financing needs to come with strings attached. And those strings need to include tenant protections, including rent caps. That's a day one action that any president could do. In fact, Biden could do it right now while he's still the president. And we want to see that happen. That would impact the lives of millions of people in this country and relieve some of that pain that so many are feeling right now.
Tara Raghuveer, I appreciate the conversation once again. You are welcome back anytime.
Thanks so much, Brittany. Take care.